Tyler, a ruthless property owner, stormed into Mia's apartment with two burly men. Ignoring her pleas in the presence of her young son, he ordered them to start removing furniture. Mia, pale and weak from cancer treatments, tried to reason with Tyler. "Please, I just need a few more days. My next check, Dad." Tyler cut her off. "I've heard it all before. You're out." "No." He nodded to his men, who began forcefully packing Mia's belongings into boxes. Mia's son, Tommy, cried in the corner, clutching his stuffed bear. Tyler showed no sympathy, barking orders and threatening to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Within an hour, Mia and Tommy stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by hastily packed boxes. Rain began to fall as Mia fumbled with her phone, desperately calling friends for help. Finally, her friend Sarah answered. "Of course you can stay with me," Sarah said, hearing the distress in Mia's voice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As they waited, Mia held Tommy close, her mind racing. How would she manage her treatments? What about Tommy's school? The custody hearing was in 2 weeks. How would this affect her case? Sarah arrived, helping them load their belongings into her car. At Sarah's apartment, Mia tucked Tommy into bed on the couch, then collapsed at the kitchen table. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Mia confessed, her voice breaking. "If I lose custody." Sarah squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out. You're not alone." The next day, Mia visited Dr. Emily for her scheduled treatment. Noticing Mia's distress, Emily pressed for details. As Mia recounted the eviction, Emily's expression hardened. "This isn't right," Emily said. "And I bet you're not the only one he's done this to." Emily made some calls during her lunch break. By the end of the day, she had spoken to 3 other patients who had similar stories about Tyler. A pattern of abuse was emerging. "I can't just stand by and watch this happen," Emily decided. She began formulating a plan to gather evidence and expose Tyler's unlawful practices. Dr. Emily spent her weekend visiting other tenants affected by Tyler's abusive practices. She knocked on doors, introducing herself as a concerned community member. Many were hesitant to speak at first, fearing retaliation. "I understand your concern," Emily reassured them. "But if we don't stand together, nothing will change." Slowly, people began to open up. Emily heard stories of sudden rent increases, ignored maintenance requests, and threats of eviction. She meticulously documented each account, building a comprehensive dossier of Tyler's misdeeds. One elderly couple showed her mold-covered walls that Tyler refused to address. A single father described how Tyler had tried to evict him after his child was diagnosed with a chronic illness. Each story fueled Emily's determination to bring Tyler to justice. Meanwhile, Mia sat with Sarah in her small living room, watching Tommy play with his toys. "I'm scared, Sarah," Mia admitted. "What if the judge thinks I can't provide a stable home for Tommy now?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Listen to me, Mia. You're an incredible mother. You're fighting cancer and still putting Tommy first. That's what matters." Mia nodded, wiping away a tear. "You're right. I can't give up. Tommy needs me, and I need him. He's the reason I'm fighting so hard." As the week progressed, word spread about Emily's investigation. A group of tenants, past and present, gathered in a community center to share their experiences. "We're not just here for Mia," Emily addressed the group. "We're here for all of you, and for anyone else who might fall victim to Tyler's greed." The room buzzed with energy as people began to realize they weren't alone. Ideas for action started flowing, documenting violations, organizing protests, reaching out to local media. "This is bigger than just getting our deposits back or fixing a leaky faucet," one man said. "It's about standing up to injustice." The group decided to form a tenants' rights organization, with Emily as their advisor. They scheduled regular meetings and started a social media campaign to raise awareness. As the meeting concluded, Emily felt a mix of hope and determination. She knew the fight ahead would be tough, but seeing the strength of the community coming together gave her confidence. They were no longer isolated victims. They were a united force ready to challenge Tyler's reign of exploitation. The day of the hearing arrived. Tyler strode into the courtroom, his expensive suit and cocky smile betraying his confidence. He nodded to his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a reputation for aggressive tactics. Mia sat on the opposite side, her face pale but determined. Emily and Sarah flanked her, offering silent support. The bailiff called the court to order as Judge Sarah Edwards entered. Her stern gaze swept the room, lingering on Tyler for a moment. We're here to address the eviction of Mia Thompson and allegations of tenant abuse against Tyler Roth, Judge Edwards began. Mr. Roth, you may present your case first. Tyler's lawyer stood, launching into a well-rehearsed speech about property rights and contract violations. Tyler nodded along, his smirk growing with each point. Judge Edwards listened impassively, then turned to Mia's side. And your response, Ms. Thompson? Emily stood, surprising Tyler. Your Honor, I'm Dr. Emily Carter. I'm here to present evidence on behalf of Ms. Thompson and other tenants affected by Mr. Roth's practices. Tyler's smile faltered as Emily approached the bench with a thick folder. Your Honor, what I have here is a compilation of testimonies, photographs, and documentation detailing a pattern of abuse and neglect spanning years. As Emily presented each piece of evidence, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. Photographs of mold-infested apartments, copies of fraudulent bills, and sworn statements from dozens of tenants painted a damning picture. Mr. Roth has systematically exploited vulnerable tenants, ignoring health and safety regulations, and using intimidation tactics to silence complaints, Emily explained. Tyler's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Edwards overruled her each time, her expression growing darker as the evidence mounted. Your Honor, Emily continued, Ms. Thompson's eviction is just one example of Mr. Roth's disregard for human dignity. She was undergoing cancer treatment, caring for a young child, and Mr. Roth threw her out without proper notice or consideration. As Emily concluded her presentation, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Edwards studied the documents, her brow furrowed. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. Mr. Roth, Judge Edwards said, her voice sharp. Do you have any response to these allegations? Tyler looked to his lawyer, who seemed at a loss for words. For the first time, his confident facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the panic beneath. Tyler stood up, straightening his tie. Your Honor, these accusations are greatly exaggerated. I run a business, not a charity. If tenants can't pay, they can't stay. It's simple economics. Judge Edwards leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Roth, are you aware of the legal requirements for eviction in the state? Of course, Your Honor, Tyler replied, his confidence wavering slightly. The judge held up a document. Then perhaps you can explain this notice of eviction given to Ms. Thompson. It fails to meet several legal requirements, including proper notice period and documentation of lease violations. Tyler's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he waved her off. Your Honor, in the real estate business, sometimes you have to move quickly. Paperwork can be flexible. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Edwards' expression hardened. Mr. Roth, are you admitting to knowingly violating tenant protection laws? Tyler backpedaled. No, that's not what I meant. I simply Your Honor, Emily interjected, if I may. At the judge's nod, she approached with another folder. These are copies of Mr. Roth's rental agreements from the past 5 years. You'll notice discrepancies in rent increases that far exceed legal limits. As the judge examined the documents, a commotion arose outside the courtroom. The bailiff stepped out, returning moments later to whisper to Judge Edwards. It appears we have some unexpected interest in our proceedings, the judge announced. There are reporters outside requesting access to the courtroom. Tyler's face paled. His lawyer stood up. Your Honor, we object to any media presence. This is a private matter. Judge Edwards shook her head. This courtroom is open to the public, counselor. Given the nature of these allegations, I see no reason to exclude the press. As reporters filed in, cameras flashing, Tyler slumped in his chair. The local news anchor he recognized looked directly at him, her eyes gleaming with the promise of a juicy story. Mia watched the scene unfold, a mix of hope and anxiety churning in her stomach. She caught Emily's reassuring glance and sat up straighter. For the first time since her eviction, she felt a glimmer of justice on the horizon. Judge Edwards called for order. Mr. Roth, in light of this new evidence, I'm expanding the scope of this hearing. We'll be examining all of your business practices in detail. Tyler loosened his collar, the weight of his actions finally pressing down on him. As the court took a recess, Tyler huddled with his lawyer in a corner of the hallway. His face was etched with panic. We need to shut this down, he hissed. Whatever it takes. His lawyer shook her head. Tyler, this is serious. The judge is I don't care, Tyler cut her off. Fix it. He stormed off, leaving his lawyer looking exasperated. Tyler approached a group of tenants waiting to testify. He flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey folks, let's talk. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone." One of the tenants, an elderly man, frowned. "What do you mean?" Tyler lowered his voice. "Look, if you're willing to change your story a bit, make things sound less dramatic, I can make it worth your while. Say 3 months free rent." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Unbeknownst to Tyler, Emily was within earshot, her eyes widening at his blatant attempt at witness tampering. Emily quickly made her way to Judge Edwards' chambers, knocking urgently. "Your Honor, I need to speak with you immediately." Inside, Emily recounted what she'd overheard. Judge Edwards' face darkened with each word. "This is extremely serious, Dr. Carter. Thank you for bringing it to my attention promptly." When court resumed, Judge Edwards addressed the room. "It has come to my attention that there may have been an attempt to interfere with witness testimony. This court takes such actions very seriously." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge continued. "In light of this, I'm ordering a full investigation into Mr. Roth's business practices, extending beyond the scope of today's hearing. Furthermore, any attempts to contact or influence witnesses will result in immediate contempt charges." She turned her steely gaze directly to Tyler. "Mr. Roth, given the gravity of these allegations and the potential for further misconduct, I'm freezing all your business assets pending the outcome of this investigation." Tyler jumped to his feet. "You can't do that. I have rights." "Sit down, Mr. Roth," Judge Edwards warned. "Your rights do not include the right to exploit others or obstruct justice. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Roth remains in the courthouse until we've concluded today's proceedings. I want to hear from every witness present." As Tyler sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally seemed to hit him. His empire, built on the backs of vulnerable tenants, was crumbling before his eyes. As the legal battle intensified, Mia found herself at the center of a growing movement. The group of tenants and supporters that had formed around her case began meeting regularly at a local community center. Mia, despite her ongoing health struggles, became an unexpected leader. "I never wanted to be an activist," she confided to the group one evening. "But if my story can help others, I have to speak up." The room was filled with people from all walks of life, united by their experiences with Tyler's abusive practices. They shared stories, offered support, and planned their next steps. Emily, acting as an advisor, helped organize their efforts. "We need to make sure every voice is heard," she said. "Each of your stories matters." As word spread, more people came forward. Local news outlets began covering the case, shining a spotlight on the widespread issue of tenant abuse. Judge Edwards, true to her word, called for a public hearing. The courthouse steps were crowded with supporters and media as Mia arrived, flanked by Emily and Sarah. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Tyler sat at the defendant's table, looking considerably less confident than before. One by one, tenants took the stand. An elderly woman described how Tyler had ignored her pleas to fix a broken heater during the coldest winter in years. A young family recounted being threatened with eviction when they complained about lead paint. Each story built upon the last, creating a damning picture of Tyler's business practices. The judge listened intently, her expression growing more severe with each testimony. When it was Mia's turn to speak, a hush fell over the courtroom. She stood, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger. "I'm not just here for myself," Mia began. "I'm here for every person who's ever felt powerless against someone like Mr. Roth. When he kicked me out, I was terrified. Not just of losing my home, but of losing my son." She described her battle with cancer, the struggle to keep up with rent while paying for treatments, and the constant fear of what would happen to her child if she couldn't provide a stable home. "But I'm not powerless," Mia concluded, her eyes bright with determination. "None of us are. By standing together, by refusing to be silent, we have the strength to fight injustice." As Mia returned to her seat, the courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Edwards allowed it for a moment before calling for order. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson," the judge said, her voice filled with respect. "This court commends your courage. Let it be clear that this kind of exploitation will not be tolerated in our community." As the public hearing continued, the pressure on Tyler intensified. More tenants, emboldened by the testimonies they had heard, came forward with their own stories of abuse and neglect. A young college student described how Tyler had threatened to report her to immigration services if she complained about the mold in her apartment. A disabled veteran recounted how Tyler had refused to install a wheelchair ramp, effectively trapping him in his home. Each new testimony added weight to the case against Tyler. The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the full extent of his misdeeds became clear. Tyler's lawyer attempted to discredit some of the witnesses, but her efforts fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence and consistent accounts. As the day wore on, Tyler's composure began to crack. He whispered urgently to his lawyer, his face pale and drawn. The confident landlord who had entered the courtroom days ago was nowhere to be seen. Judge Edwards, listening intently to each testimony, took copious notes. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes flashed with indignation at particularly egregious accounts. The climax of the hearing came when Mia took the stand for a second time. This time, she spoke not just of her eviction, but of her ongoing struggle. "Your Honor," Mia began, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue, "Mr. Roth's actions didn't just leave me homeless. They put my entire future and my son's future at risk." She detailed how the stress of the eviction had affected her health, forcing her to miss crucial treatments. She spoke of sleepless nights worrying about her upcoming custody hearing, fearing that her lack of stable housing would be used against her. "But this isn't just about me," Mia continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about every parent who's had to choose between paying rent and buying food for their children. It's about every elderly person who's lived in fear of being thrown out on the street. It's about basic human dignity." As Mia finished her testimony, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. Even Tyler seemed moved, avoiding eye contact and staring at the floor. Judge Edwards leaned forward, her voice filled with compassion and resolve. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for your bravery. This court recognizes the profound impact Mr. Roth's actions have had on you and many others. I assure you, justice will be served." The judge then turned to address the entire courtroom. The evidence and testimonies presented here reveal a disturbing pattern of exploitation and disregard for human welfare. This court will not stand idly by while such injustices occur. As the hearing reached its final stages, Tyler's desperation became palpable. During a recess, he approached Mia in the hallway, his lawyer trailing behind him with a look of resigned frustration. "Mia, please," Tyler said, his voice low and urgent. "We can work something out. I'll give you back your apartment, rent-free for a year. Just drop the charges." Mia stood her ground, meeting Tyler's gaze steadily. "This isn't about me anymore, Tyler. It's about everyone you've hurt. No deal." Emily, who had been watching nearby, stepped forward. "Mr. Roth, I suggest you step away. Any attempt to influence a witness can be considered tampering." Tyler retreated, his face a mask of barely contained panic. When court resumed, Judge Edwards addressed the attempted deal. "Mr. Roth, your actions demonstrate a continued disregard for the legal process. I'm issuing a restraining order, effective immediately. You are not to approach or contact Ms. Thompson nor any of the other tenants involved in this case." The judge then turned to Mia. "Ms. Thompson, the court recognizes the threat to your well-being. I'm granting an emergency order to ensure you and your son have safe, stable housing for the duration of these proceedings." Mia's eyes filled with tears of relief as the judge continued. "Furthermore, given the evidence of widespread misconduct, I'm ordering a freeze on all of Mr. Roth's real estate transactions pending a full investigation." Tyler slumped in his chair as the judge's words sank in. His empire was crumbling around him. Outside the courthouse, news of Tyler's actions spread quickly. By evening, local news stations were running stories about the case. Social media buzzed with accounts from other tenants coming forward with their own experiences. Tyler's business partners began distancing themselves. Investors called emergency meetings, concerned about their involvement with his properties. The once untouchable landlord found himself increasingly isolated. Mia, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by the support pouring in from the community. A local nonprofit offered her temporary housing, ensuring she and her son had a safe place to stay. Others volunteered to help her move and get settled. As Mia tucked her son into bed that night in their new, clean, and safe apartment, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope for a better future. The final day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, with spectators spilling into the hallway. Judge Edwards entered, her face grave as she took her seat. "Before we proceed," she began, "I want to address some new information that has come to light." She held up a thick folder. Financial records subpoenaed from Mr. Roth's accounts reveal a pattern of fraudulent activities extending far beyond tenant abuse. Tyler's face drained of color as the judge continued. Mr. Roth has been systematically manipulating property values, evading taxes, and engaging in money laundering schemes. The extent of these activities is staggering. Tyler stood abruptly. Your Honor, I can explain, Dad. Sit down, Mr. Roth, Judge Edwards ordered sharply. You'll have your chance to speak. As the judge detailed the financial crimes, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Tyler's lawyer looked shell-shocked, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. When Tyler finally got his chance to speak, his usual confidence was gone. He stumbled through a series of excuses and justifications, each sounding weaker than the last. Your Honor, he pleaded, I was just trying to run a successful business. Everyone cuts corners sometimes, right? Judge Edwards' expression hardened. Mr. Roth, exploiting vulnerable people and defrauding the government are not cutting corners. They are serious crimes. She turned to address the entire courtroom. This case has revealed not just individual acts of cruelty, but a systemic abuse of power that cannot be tolerated in our society. The judge's voice rang with finality as she delivered her verdict. Tyler Roth, this court finds you guilty of multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and violations of tenant protection laws. She outlined a series of penalties, substantial fines, mandatory restitution to all affected tenants, and the forced sale of his properties to repay his debts. Furthermore, she added, I am recommending criminal charges be filed based on the evidence of financial crimes. You will remand yourself into custody immediately. As the bailiff approached Tyler, the reality of his downfall finally seemed to hit him. His empire, built on exploitation and greed, had crumbled to dust. Mia watched from her seat, a complex mix of emotions on her face. Justice had been served, but the cost had been high for so many. Tyler stood in shock as the bailiff handcuffed him. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps as he was led away. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing as Tyler was escorted to a waiting police car. In the following days, the full extent of Tyler's crimes came to light. Investigators uncovered a vast network of fraudulent dealings, implicating several other prominent business figures in the city. The case had blown open a web of corruption that had gone unchecked for years. Mia, still processing the whirlwind of events, received news that brought tears to her eyes. The judge had expedited her custody case, citing the extraordinary circumstances. With her housing situation stabilized and community support evident, Mia was granted full custody of her son. A month after the trial, the community gathered for an event honoring those who had stood up against Tyler's oppression. Mia, looking healthier than she had in months, took the stage to address the crowd. When I was evicted, I thought I had lost everything, she began, her voice strong. But what I found was a community of fighters, of people unwilling to let injustice stand. She looked out at the faces of those who had stood with her, Emily, Sarah, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by Tyler's greed. We've won a battle, but the war against exploitation and corruption isn't over, Mia continued. Let our victory be a message to anyone who would abuse their power. We will not be silenced. We will not be broken. The crowd erupted in applause as Mia finished her speech. As she stepped down, her son ran to hug her, a smile lighting up his face. In the aftermath of the trial, significant changes swept through the city. New tenant protection laws were enacted, inspired by the case. A task force was formed to investigate other landlords suspected of similar practices. Tyler, facing years in prison, watched from his cell as his ill-gotten empire was dismantled. The properties he had once used to exploit others were now being converted into affordable housing units, managed by a non-profit organization. As for Mia, she found a new purpose in her experience. Despite her ongoing health challenges, she became an advocate for tenant rights, using her story to inspire others to stand up against injustice. The final scene showed Mia and her son in their new home, surrounded by friends from the community. As they shared a meal and laughter, it was clear that they had found not just justice, but a new family forged in the fires of adversity.